Hello, welcome to week number 3 of History in the New Testament. If you remember last week, we talked about the church in Colossians. This week, we're going to continue talking about that church, and we're going to bring out another little thing that Paul said to them, and hopefully we can understand what he's saying just a little bit more clearly. Remember, the church of Colossae was a Gentile church. Colossae was built on a crossroads in the Roman Empire on a trade route. It had been overshadowed right now during Paul's time by Laodicea. And the people of Colossae and in that church were mostly Gentiles. And like many churches during Paul's age, there was a group of teachers who came through from the Jerusalem church and was trying to tell the people that in order to be a good Christian, you also needed to be a good Jew. And so you needed to convert to Judaism, you needed to fulfill the Mosaic law, and in so doing, you became a good Jew, and then you became a good Christian. And Paul is writing this letter in part to tell the people that that is not true. In our passage today, we want to look at Colossians 2, verses 13 and 14. You were dead in your trespasses and the uncircumcision of your flesh. God made alive together with him, having forgiven us all our trespasses by nailing the record of our debt that stood against us with its legal demands. This he set aside, nailing it to the cross. So Paul is telling the people here, you are made alive in spite of your uncircumcision. God didn't make you alive because you became circumcised, but you are already alive. And he did this because of Jesus, nothing that you did, all of what Jesus did. And he did this through his crucifixion and through his triumph. Next week we'll look at the triumph. This week we'll look at the crucifixion. And so, what is Roman crucifixion? Well, the Romans would kill in brutal fashion for everyone to see. One of their own, Quintilian, who lived around the same time as Paul, AD 35 to 100, a Roman rhetorician, said, whenever we crucify the guilty, the most crowded roads are chosen, where the most people can see and be moved by this fear. You see, what he was getting at was that the Romans wanted you to be afraid of them. Anything that they could do to make you afraid, they would do, and crucifixion was one of those things. Stephen Mansfield, in his 2014 article, said, in the Roman mind, crucifixion was an act of state terror. By the time of Jesus, the ancient world had already tried dealing with its undesirables by boiling them in oil, stoning them, strangling them, drowning them, and setting them on fire. All of these brought on death too quickly. Officials wanted a method of killing that was slow and terrifying enough that no onlooker missed the implied threat. Crucifixion met this need. And you see, Jesus was crucified in such a manner by such a country. Rome wanted to send a message. And when they crucified someone, they would, above their head, write what they were being crucified for. And remember the story of Jesus in the Gospels. You would see that Jesus had above his head written, this is Jesus, the King of the Jews. And the Romans would do this quite often, actually. If someone tried to rise up against Rome, he and his followers would be crucified. If someone tried to overthrow the Roman government, he would be crucified. And Pilate, the governor of Judea at this time, wrote above Jesus' head, the King of the Jews. And so Paul took this very common occurrence, this occurrence that everyone would have understood, and he tied it into what Jesus did in his crucifixion. And so Paul says, you were dead in your trespasses and the uncircumcision of your flesh. God made alive together with Jesus, having forgiven us all our trespasses, by canceling out the record of our debt that stood against us with its legal demands. This he set aside, nailing it to the cross. Paul says, why did Jesus be crucified? Well, the crime that he committed was sin. In God's eyes, the crime above Jesus' head was our trespasses, our record of debt. God took those aside, nailed it to the cross of Jesus. And that's why in 2 Corinthians 5 verse 21, Paul says, "For our sake, God made Jesus to be sin, who knew no sin, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God." On the cross, Jesus actually became sin. God made him who knew no sin to be sin. Above Jesus' head was written the list of our trespasses, our record of debt. And so God took this, nailed our trespasses above Jesus' head as his crime. And in our place, Jesus stood condemned on the cross. In our place, he took that crime. And in our place, we get his righteousness. So next time we'll look at what Paul means by disarming rulers and authorities, putting them to open shame by triumphing over them in him. That's the next verse. But what does this verse mean for us today? Well, we're alive in Jesus. We don't need to follow the Mosaic law. We don't need to be circumcised. We don't need to worry about becoming a good Jew. Jesus already took care of us. We're not made perfect because of things that we do, but because of what Jesus already did. And part of what Jesus did was he took our trespasses on himself on the cross. And when Jesus rose from the dead, we become alive with him. So when talking to people about Jesus, don't be afraid to use things from their culture, from the culture around us. That's what Paul did. He pulled the very common occurrence of the crimes committed being nailed above someone's head on a cross. He knew that the Colossian church would have known and most likely seen this. And Paul uses that to teach us and to teach them about Jesus. So don't be afraid when we are telling your neighbors, your friends about Jesus, to use things from the culture to help them understand. Well, until next week, hope you have a good time. Hope you're staying safe, staying healthy. God bless you.